Call me a homer, but I can't see Oregon losing this game.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Today's episode brought to you by our friends right over at FanDuel. That's America's number one sportsbook. Place your first $5 bet. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Who could be in for a big game? What's the final score going to be? And Oregon's got a new commitment in the class of 2025. I know many of you have wondered, when's that going to happen again? Well, here we are. Douglas Utu is back to the Ducks, and Oregon offered a quarterback. I'm not quite sure about the second part, but I'm going to discuss it later on today's show. But let's start with UCLA. A day away from game day, and it's great to have Oregon football back. I'm sure there's a part of all of us that was kind of happy to rest during the bye week and be like, don't have to worry about the stress or get frustrated officials or anything like that. But after bye week, I got to tell you, I'm ready for the game. And part of the reason I'm ready for it, I know that Oregon's going to win. I can't see how they lose this game. Even if Oregon doesn't play a great football game, they can still go out and beat the Bruins. Think about this. Oregon did not play a good game against Idaho. Did not play its best game against Boise State. Still found a way to win. Now, those games were at home, but is this going to be a raucous road environment? No. But if you put Boise State and UCLA on a neutral field right now, who do you think is winning the football game? I know they played in a bowl game last year. This is a very different UCLA team. Very different UCLA team. Different players, different coaching staff. Part of the reason that I'm so confident in Oregon in this game, and I'll tell you my prediction later on today's show, I think they win and cover down at the Rose Bowl, is Dan Lanning. Dan Lanning has never lost to an unranked team, and he's played unranked teams far better than this UCLA team. And I think the Bruins are in year one of a complete rebuild, tear down, trying to build things up, and we'll see how it goes. But this season is going to be rough. And when UCLA gets down, there's another reason I feel good about the Ducks. They've kind of rolled over. At least in the Indiana game, that's what we saw. And in the second half against LSU, they played really well. They showed some fight. But by no stretch of the imagination should Oregon take this team lightly. But you don't have a rowdy road environment, which does bring to mind the Stanford factor. You know, Oregon struggled to go to the farm. Why? There's not a lot of ambiance, not a lot of juice. I think that's nullified by Oregon coming off of a bye. Because if you've been playing for the last couple weeks or used to hearing a crowd or whatnot, that's one thing. But Oregon is back to that point that, we feel as fans and that a lot of people feel in that locker room, which is, I want to hit somebody that doesn't have an Oregon jersey on. So I think if the Ducks go out and get off to a strong start, I think they absolutely roll the Bruins. And even if they don't play their best game, I think the worst case scenario is Oregon, could win a one possession slugfest. I mean, heck, Notre Dame was a 28.5 point home favorite and managed to lose outright to Northern Illinois. That's one of the biggest upsets of the year. But Oregon was in danger of losing at home to Idaho. If they play like that, they could pull it out. But the fact that Oregon has pulled it out already against Idaho, who's a top 5 FCS team, and against Boise State, who's currently a top 25 team in the country, entering their matchup with Washington State this week, I've got a lot of reasons to be confident. Oregon's roster is better. Oregon's coaching staff is better. Oregon's off a bye. I think the Ducks are a lot more motivated. They're not in a reset position. They're in a let's go contend position. And if they're going to be a team that wins a Big Ten championship this year or goes to the college football playoff, this is the sort of game that early in the year, you can give a couple of errors and mistakes that get made, but you got to clean those up. Well, this is the sort of game where you go out and you just put your foot down and say, no, Oregon's a better team. Go up 21-3 at the end of the first quarter and feel like, okay, game is probably over at this point. My brother and dad will be in attendance. I will not. And I'm, of course, envious because I love going to Oregon games. But I hope they're not sweating this one out in the fourth quarter because they shouldn't be. They just shouldn't be. How could things go wrong? I think the same sorts of issues that arose in the first two games would have to rear their heads again. That's the only way I think UCLA keeps this game around. It is a very similar script to Oregon State. And frankly, I don't know that UCLA is as good of a team as Oregon State. And the Ducks beat the Bees 49-14. Why? Because they played well. They played clean. They didn't turn the football over. They stayed away from penalties. They had continuity and success along the offensive line. You do those things, and the other keys I talked about yesterday, which for those who missed it, are pressuring Ethan Garbers, win the line of scrimmage, and don't turn the football over. If you avoid those areas, or if you win at least two of those keys to the game, I think Oregon can cruise here, because UCLA is not just at a talent deficit going into this game. They are also a team that is dealing with a bunch of injuries right now, which stinks. Injuries are the worst. We all know that. But Oregon's a little dinged up. UCLA is even more dinged up, missing a couple of key starters. I think that if Oregon has some self-inflicted wounds, the Bruins could hang around. Ethan Garbers is incredibly capable. If the defensive line doesn't play the way it's capable of, doesn't get pressure on him, he'll make some throws. He's got some receivers. Talked about that throughout the week here on the show, and I think Ethan Garbers can make throws right until he can't. And that's something I think for Oregon fans to expect going into this game, is there will be moments early on where Garbers might make a throw or two, right? I'm called back to the Cal game of 2022 on the road. Jack Plummer, not a great quarterback. Like, he's serviceable, capable, he's fine, whatever, okay. He made a couple throws early in that game, and Oregon was getting beat. And then you looked up at the end of it, and Oregon had their backups in on defense at the end of the game. That's how this one could play out. I could see UCLA getting off to a strong start, hitting a couple of downfield shots, test this Oregon secondary, which got a little bit of a test against Boise State, but not much of one, because I think they largely played well against Oregon State. That receiving core is not as talented as this one. I think of the four teams Oregon's faced this year, UCLA has the best receiving core. I think Boise's is a close second, because they had some guys who we saw that were really capable playmakers, but the trio of guys that they've got at the top, guys like J. Michael Sturdivant and Logan Loy, I think that they are certainly playmakers. The question is whether you give Ethan Garbers the time to get the ball to him. And if you do, he can make some throws. But eventually I think Oregon's defense will lean on the line of scrimmage, enforce their will, and have a really, really good game. And I think between the offense and defense, I'm most excited to watch the defense. And a lot of you are going to say offense. Will it have the same sort of success that it had against Oregon State? I certainly hope so. And I hope special teams is great. I hope everything is great. But I'm more excited to watch the defense, because this is a game that you could put up a number that is incredibly crooked. The over-under on this game is not as high as you would think. Let me double check to see if it has been altered since I last looked at it. But the over-under here, according to our friends at FanDuel, is 55.5. Oregon scoring over 30 points in this football game, they probably get towards 40. If that under hits for the game total, I think that means Oregon's defense is having a really good game. You keep the Bruins to 2 touchdowns or less, as you did against Oregon State, and I'll feel great about the defense. You score at least 30 points, I'll feel really good about the offense. But this is an opportunity for backups to get into the game at the end of it. If Oregon plays to their potential, I can't see them losing it. It can be closer than we'd like it to be, but Oregon pulled it out against Boise State, who's a better team, and Idaho, who frankly might be comparable. I don't know. I mean, UCLA is not good. So Ducks should go in. Ducks should roll. I'm feeling really confident going into this game. Let me know how you feel in the YouTube comments below, or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. Predictions are coming next. Predictions on the score. Predictions on who's having a big game. Got a lot of questions, especially from Locked On Ducks insiders, about who's having a big game this week. I have some ideas. It's coming up next. Coming up right now is Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. If the offensive line protects Dylan Gabriel, I like him over 300 yards. You got 4 healthy receivers, kind of a coin flip every week, which I love. I absolutely love for the offense. As to who's going to be the leading receiver, the default guess would be Tez Johnson. But could I see this being an Evan Stewart game? Sure. I mean, I heard a UCLA insider, someone who covers them for 24/7, over on the Odds and Audibles pod saying, yeah, the secondary, has the Oregon transfer, one-time Oregon transfer, Jalen Davies, who's capable, but he's not a number one guy, and he's kind of one of their top guys back there. And Brian Addison, also an Oregon transfer, is in the secondary. We know he can make plays, but they had an injury or two, and the rest of it is kind of full of questions. And there's just a lot of newness. There's a lot of adjustment for this UCLA team, whereas there's far more continuity for Oregon. And I think that when Gabriel has time to throw, we've seen him take underneath stuff. We've seen him hit mid-range stuff. We've seen him hit downfield stuff. I think the passing game has a really good day. So I'll take Gabriel over 300 yards in this football game, and in the offensive line. That's probably the number one thing for everybody to watch on that side of the ball, because if they play the way they did against Oregon State, I think you feel really good about the offensive line coming out of this matchup and going into next week's Friday night tilt at Autzen Stadium against Michigan State. But if you see the offensive line start to struggle again against a UCLA front four that is completely, it has completely reset from a season ago, that would be concerning. It would be concerning. Off a bye week, following a game in which they played really well, if the offensive line struggles mightily, that'd be a major concern. I expect them to play well, and if you give Dylan Gabriel time, we've seen what he does through the first 3 games. Highly efficient, highly effective. I think Evan Stewart gets another touchdown in this game of at least 25 yards. So those are my 2 passing game predictions. On the ground, I want to pick Jordan James over 100 yards. I just wonder with how well Jaden Lamar played against Oregon State, and I know the screen pass that he caught was later in the game and it was mostly in hand. I wonder if he sees an extended run. I wonder if he, not in a way that he is dramatically cutting into the carries that Jordan James or Noah Whittington gets, but I think for either James or Whittington to get over 100 yards, I think they both have to be pretty darn efficient with their touches, which they tend to be on the season. But I won't be surprised if Jaden Lamar has like 10 carries or so in the game. If you look at the box score from the Oregon State game, Ducks ran for 240 yards. Nobody even hit 90. Whittington, 7 for 64. Gabriel, 4 for 64. Holden had the 21-yard end around, and then Jordan James, 12 for 86. Now, that's 7.5 yards a carry as a team, and I think that's a number that is, of course, exceptional, attainable in this game. I don't know if they get to 7.5 because that had, a 54-yarder factored in, but I think if Oregon is in the 6 yards per carry range, sure, I'll take Jordan James, who, by the way, through 3 games has been really, really good. He's averaging 7 yards a carry. That's around what he was last year. He's only been over 100 yards once, and he did it against Boise State. He had 102 yards in that game. 102. So I don't expect him to go bonkers and have 150 and 2 touchdowns. I'll go over. I'll go over. I'll say Jordan James has one of those long runs like he had against Washington State last year, or I think he had a long one against Cal or something. I'm missing one of them in there. But I'll take Jordan James over 100, but under 120 in this game, in addition to Gabriel being over 300 and Evan Stewart catching a touchdown. So offensively, I think those guys are in for big games. I wonder if T-Ferg doesn't have a little bit of a pullback game because he's been outstanding, but the strength of this UCLA defense is the linebackers. So if you're Will Stein, looking at the secondary that they have and the injuries they have there, I wonder if they don't really attack on the perimeter and don't get the tight ends involved as much. Obviously, you want to get them involved because they're great playmakers. I just don't know that that's attacking the weakest part of this UCLA defense. So I'd look for a little bit of a lighter game from the tight ends compared to what we've seen. But certainly I expect the passing game to have plenty of success. On the defensive side of the ball, this is going to be a big game for Oregon safeties. I had Jorgie on earlier this week on Tuesday's show discussing, what Oregon kind of still needs to show or where they can most improve. And I think he went to the right spot. It's not Oregon has to be better. It's we don't really know if a wide receiver gets matched up with Kobe Savage or Tysheem Johnson, can they cover him in space? Can they make plays over the top? Can you have a Verone McKinley type presence on the back end of this defense? Or is it a little bit like last year where if you're going to make plays on the ball, it's going to come from a linebacker or from a corner? So I'm interested to see how the safeties are managed and what sort of plays they make. I mean, we know what Tysheem Johnson can do tackling around the line of scrimmage. He's phenomenal, like absolutely. The play he made last week on was his name Walker, the wide receiver for Oregon State, or 2 weeks ago, I guess now. That's an incredible play. Holds them to a fourth down. They false start, kick the field goal. It gets blocked. Huge momentum shift early in the football game. We know Tysheem can make those sorts of plays. Does he make a play on the back end? Does he, have an interception in the deep third? Like, when was the last time Oregon had an interception way down the field? Trying to think. I mean, Brian Addison had one against UCLA a couple of years ago, and ironically, he's, of course, now playing for the Bruins. Not the last time Oregon had an interception, but one from a safety in the deep third or a corner. But, like Nico Reed's interception against Idaho. I wouldn't count that as being a deep third pick. Like, that's a sideline kind of intermediate throw. I'm talking like a deep ball pushed down the field, safety ranges over the top, John Boyette, Verone McKinley style makes play. I'd love to see that from either of these safeties because I don't think we've seen it yet, but I think they'll get the biggest test that they've had so far because Boise State had a good receiving core and threw the ball 40 times, but their passing game is different, and I think UCLA has a much stronger commitment to throwing the football to where they're going to get tested early and often and throughout the game. So Tysheem or Kobe Savage, would love to see one of those guys pop and have a big game in this one as well. One more defensive player to note, Derek Harmon. I've talked about him throughout the week. I think he has a big game. Does it show up in the box score? Maybe it won't. Maybe it'll just be a PFF grade or an eyeball test of, man, he was blowing up run plays, pressuring Ethan Garbers. Maybe that's what it'll come down to. But this UCLA offensive line hasn't been great this year, and Derek Harmon is as advertised. Every single bit that the guy that Oregon fans thought they were getting when he came over from Michigan State, he's been that dude. Jamari Caldwell's been solid. Harmon has been the better of the two. I think he has a big game this week. So that leads me to my score predictions since we've got recruiting stuff to cover later in today's show. Oregon 38, UCLA 10, and I don't know that it feels that close throughout, but I think the Ducks go into, I think the starting offense probably puts up 31 to 35 of those points. Because if I'm UCLA, I look at the Oregon State approach and say, hey, let's take the air out of the ball at least a little bit. Maybe have a quick passing game, chew the clock. But I think Oregon has a big lead going into the fourth quarter and hopefully is able to get Dante Moore in the second team offense, some run. Drop your score predictions below. YouTube comments, Twitter, wherever. Oregon's 2025 recruiting efforts, not done. In fact, ratcheting up. They're back inside the top 10. We'll talk about Douglas Utu coming up next. After we talk about FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's number one sportsbook. Not 2, not 3, not 4, number 1. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're placing your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. The line on this Oregon-UCLA game has moved all the way up to 25.5. You just heard my score prediction. Oregon 38, UCLA 10. I expect big things from the defense, and I think they go and cover that number. That's a lot of points to cover on the road. There's a realistic world where UCLA keeps it within 14 to 20 and we never see the second stringers. Or there's a world where Oregon plays sloppy, UCLA gets Ethan Garbers in rhythm, and boom, you've got a single-digit game going into the fourth quarter. All possible. Whatever you think is going to happen, just make sure you go bet it at FanDuel. FanDuel.com, that's the place to go to get America's #1 sportsbook. Did you think recruiting stopped during the season? I hope not. And Dan Lanning and his staff know that it does not. So, Oregon with a big flip here. Douglas Utu, Bishop Gorman High School product, second offensive lineman they've taken from one of the best, maybe the best, probably definitely the best high school in the Las Vegas area, just 2.5 hours down the road from where I live. 6'4", 317 pounds. He's the number 2 interior offensive lineman, according to 24/7 Sports in the country, and the number 69 player overall. Now, ESPN is even higher on Douglas Utu. 24/7's composite, which is what I tend to look at because it's a more encompassing metric, doesn't have him as a 5-star. He's just short of that. ESPN's got him as a 5-star and the number 13 player in the land. Regardless of what those rankings say, this is a talented guy and a really nice pickup. He was committed to Tennessee. Oregon has flipped him, and it's propelled the Ducks recruiting class back inside the top 10. So he was committed to the Vols. Bama was in the mix. Nebraska was in the mix. Michigan was in the mix. Those were the finalists when he chose Tennessee. Oregon's gotten the flip. Shout out to Alik Terry. And I know there have been plenty of questions that I've gotten here on the show about Oregon's offensive line and how it's going to project after the season, because they're going to lose a lot. Only guy from this year's team guaranteed, I think, to be back next year is Poncho. That's a lot of offensive line to replace. So this is a position group that I think Oregon has recruited well, not as well as the defensive line, but they have still done a good job. And there are still talented guys waiting in the wings. Guys like Bryce Bolton, or guys like Devin Brooks, or guys like Fox Crater or Shaq McCroy. There is another crop of offensive linemen, and Douglas Utu could be one of those guys. And his commitment on its own moved Oregon's class up to number 8 nationally, up 5 spots from where it was before. He is the 16th player of the class of 2025. According to 24/7's metrics, he's the 6th highest rated player that Oregon has in this class. Now, you can look around and say, oh, well, the composite's got it here, ESPN's got him there, On Three's here, Rivals is there. Is a big-time recruit. Something that I always look at when determining, what to expect from a recruit or how big of a victory it is. Who else wanted him? Nebraska, on the rise Big Ten program. Michigan, reigning national champs. Bama, don't think I need to say anything there. Tennessee looks really, really good. They've got a great program running over there in Knoxville, and Josh Heupel's a really good coach. This is a really, really good flip for the Ducks. I don't know if they're done with offensive linemen in the class of 25. They could be. They've got 4 of them right now. This might depend on 2 things: how they feel the transfer situation is going to work out, and also how prepared they feel other guys are. So if they think that, 2 of the 4 offensive linemen they've gotten this year, at least one of them is, because Alai Kalani-Uvalu, he's going on a 2-year mission, so he won't be around for a couple of seasons. The other offensive linemen are Dimitri Manning, a 3-star, and Zaire Addison, a 4-star offensive lineman. If they don't feel like those guys are all on the same timeline, then they could go get another offensive lineman. I think Kalani-Uvalu taking his mission right after his upcoming, or ongoing, I should say, senior season, that could contribute to them adding another offensive lineman if they find a fit. But could you get by with 4? I think so. With the transfer portal and the availability of quality offensive linemen, a Johnny Cornelius, 2-year starter, transfer. Nishad Struthers going to start at left guard on Saturday, as he did against Oregon State. He was a transfer as well. And other guys, Marcus Harper was a grandfathered-in recruit. Poncho was a guy that they recruited and played as a true freshman. And Connerly was the first big recruiting win of the Dan Lanning era. So I think they've been pretty balanced along the offensive line with regards to transfers and high school players. But certainly they know internally what else they need. Like they have an understanding. Because I say that because I get questions from people all the time. Well, do you think they need this or do you think they need that? I'm like, I'd rather react to what happens and let that determine my assessment rather than trying to guess whether the coaching staff knows what they're doing or how they want to operate here. And I think this says that they wanted at least one more offensive lineman. Obviously, I could see him going to get one more. I don't think they'd get more than one additional offensive lineman in the 2025 cycle, but this won't be the last recruit that commits to the Ducks in the 25 class during this 2024 season. Last year they had, I think, 5 or 6 was the exact number. I did not double check that before hopping on to record, so don't quote me on it, but it was in that sort of range. Guys like Aiden Breland and Ife Obadegwu committed during the season. So Oregon's up to 16 players. I bet they get close to 20, somewhere in that 18 to 20 range. But, the impact of these guys is pretty profound. I mean, Utu moves them up. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, by the way. Apologies if I'm not. But Douglas Utu moves them up from 13th to 8th. And Oregon still doesn't have the volume of those top 5 classes, but certainly landing Douglas Utu puts them a lot more squarely in that fold to have a top 5 class for the second straight season. So, great pickup for the Ducks offensively. He's listed as an interior offensive lineman, like I said, 6'4", 317. Might have to talk to Brian Smith about what his career prospects are, but regardless, as a recruit, highly regarded for a reason, and Bishop Gorman, big time high school football program. Another curious recruiting note: Oregon offered a 4-star quarterback in the 25 cycle, Jaron Kiwe Sagapolotele. I did my best with that pronunciation. I actually think I did all right. He's a 4-star left-handed quarterback who's currently a verbal commit to Cal. He's one of the top 25 quarterbacks, according to 24/7, in the country for this 2025 cycle. It caught me off guard. It caught me off guard a little bit. There was a quarterback that Oregon was looking at in kind of the June timeline, and I was discussing here on the show, would Oregon take a second quarterback? They could. There's no such thing really as too many, because if a guy transfers out and never plays, but serves as competition for other guys to push them to be the best version of themselves, it's not the worst thing in the world. I just saw the offer and was like, can't say I saw that one coming. I didn't, check out his film or anything like that. He's not, an incredibly highly coveted recruit, but he's a blue chip quarterback guy, and there are only so many of those in a given recruiting cycle. I'll let you all interpret for yourselves what it means that Oregon's got a quarterback committed with 4 already on the roster, right? You've got Gabriel, you've got Moore, you've got Novosad, you've got Moga, and then there's the walk-on Brock Thomas as well. But after this year, Gabriel's gone. You'll probably have a battle between Dante Moore and Austin Novosad. Luke Moga can try to get his name into the mix, but he's probably a guy that needs to sit for 2 or maybe even 3 seasons before he'd be prepared to start at quarterback for the Ducks. You're bringing in Akili Smith Jr., so you're actually going to be at Moga, Novosad, Moore, Smith. That's 4. If you brought him in, he'd be 5. That's a lot. You know who's got 5 quarterbacks right now? Ohio State. I'll throw that out as you never know how these things are going to play out. So just thought I would note that, and I'll wrap up today's show. And I will be back for a pretty timely, thanks to the late kickoff, reaction show to the UCLA game on Saturday night. This question from Alexi. Always keep your questions coming. YouTube comments, X, formerly known as Twitter. If you want priority access, go join the flock over at Subtext. That link in the description below. Wherever you listen to or watch the show, you can get a free 14-day trial. Alexi asks, hey Spencer, what are your thoughts on Georgia beating Kentucky by 1 point and only dropping by 1 rank, but the Ducks winning their games by 3 or more points and dropping from 3rd to 8th in the AP Top 25? Oregon was actually down to 9th after their first couple of games. They are back up to 8th heading into this game against UCLA. I don't think this is, though there are many illogical things with the AP Top 25 this week, like Washington State not being ranked and Texas A&M being ranked at all. I don't think this is one of the more illogical things. I understand where you're coming from, but Georgia went on the road to play a conference foe. Oregon fell because they played at home to 2 G5 FCS schools. Even if they're really good G5s or really good FCS schools, which Boise State and Idaho are, these two things are not the same. Competition level at home, I think should be punished more in the views of the AP voters than going on the road and struggling to win a conference game. And it's not as if Georgia, didn't drop. They did. Texas overtook them for the number 1 spot. Perception matters more as the college football playoff rankings get closer and closer to being rolled out. But I pay attention to this stuff. I talked about it yesterday on the show. I think it matters. It's not defining Oregon's season necessarily. It could at some point come down to Oregon and another team for who gets a home playoff game versus who gets a road playoff game. Well, if that's the case, then yeah, suddenly that could matter quite a bit. But for now, I think Oregon just focus on UCLA. And if you're anywhere inside the top 10, that's where you want to be going into the Ohio State game. Win that. Win the rest of your games or don't lose more than one other one. Get to the Big Ten title game. And if you win that, you set yourself up for the bye no matter what. But appreciate the question. Keep them coming. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day and go Ducks.